Well, welcome back to Side Quests 010. This is the 10th episode of Side Quest, and today we're going to talk about Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind, which was made in 1984 and based off a manga and actually precedes Studio Ghibli's creation, interestingly enough. And so we have Mr. Wesley Schantz back with us. Nice to have you, Wes.
Hey, good to be back.
And so something I should announce, besides the fact that this is the second podcast that Wes and I have done today, and he sort of has done three because you were also teaching The Hobbit earlier today, is that I think this is our 30th episode together, collaborating on this podcast. Wes, I think we have 7 Harry Potter conversations together, 10 of these side quest conversations now, and 13 contemplative conversations. And so, major benchmark.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's like a ton of material and like a drop in the bucket compared to all the different stuff we were thinking about. Yeah, start.
I know. Yeah, very, very much is. And we finished something today, and we're getting pretty close to finishing the initial segment of side quests here. I think we only have technically one more Hayao Miyazaki movie to watch after this, and it's very different from the ones before. The Wind Rises, I think.
Oh,
and
wow.
Yeah, and then I think it's about time for us to move on to the next project, which we had been talking a lot about, and which is sort of similar to your original project on Earthbound. And I know you had been thinking about perhaps talking about Final Fantasy VII or something else like that.
Yeah, I think that should be the next series here. That game is so foundational for a lot of the approach that I have to reading and playing video games and stuff. That was just a really formative experience. So I think that would be cool to do a playthrough and talking about different chapters of that. That'd be awesome.
I think that'd be great too. And something that I recently learned while reading A Billion Wicked Thoughts by Ogi Ogas and Saigadam is that when humans are developing, when we're young, we imprint at specific times of our development. And so especially with, like, say, things like sexual cues, like the things that we look for in other people, we often imprint based on the body types or that which we can see, which are available to us during the time when we imprint. And so when you are young, you can be imprinted in a way so that the people from the generation before appear to you like the most beautiful people that have ever existed, because the characteristics that mark them are the ones that imprinted on you. And so something interesting about that is, I wonder if there's an extension, if there's a sort of abstract imprinting that happens around adolescence, that the stories that we're told at those times sort of take root and help to shape us, specifically because of the transitional nature of that time. And so, yeah, because I know I grew up, and now I would say I have a good Christian education, but I didn't. At the time, I didn't grow up going to church to anything. I've largely learned what I've learned through school and reading. But at that time, when I was 13, when I was 14, the biggest story in my life was probably Final Fantasy VII. The story that was most formative, that I thought about the most, that I imagined during my day when I was going through my daily things. The characters that would pop into my head were Cloud and Sephiroth, and it's sort of embarrassing to say, but I don't think I'm in bad company in saying that either. And
I totally agree. Something you could probably do, like some kind of study and survey people who grew up in that time and what kinds of movies and video games they were really into, and which have like remained important to their inner life growing up. And I think that would be a really interesting like experiment to just run and see what people say.
Yeah, well, maybe we can get some fun and we can run it ourselves. And another idea I'm having is, seeing as you seem to have this incredible endurance for thinking and podcasting. And you are, of course, a teacher, so you do this sort of thing professionally. And perhaps in some ways a podcast is much easier than teaching, though in other ways it's sort of better because you don't have the actual interaction with a bunch of people. But then on the other hand, you don't have to manage a bunch of people. Maybe we should do like some sort of marathon someday. See how long we can go, how many different episodes we can do, see if some people will come along for the ride.
So like the fundraiser that Signum Mythgard do every year, they have like a day that's just like a marathon from I don't know, whenever in the morning Corey Olson wakes up and turns his computer on till like, past midnight sometime when they've they've run through half of the Lord of the Rings online world as a chicken or whatever they do, like funny stuff like that. So yeah, that would be, I think that would be a cool goal to work towards at some point. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
and yeah, and I love the idea of doing new anomalous things in the world to produce new information. And so, well, let's jump in. So, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. A couple things just about the intro to this. The name Nausicaa, which you notice has a diaresis over the second A, which means that the name should be pronounced Nausicaa, but is not, of course,
Yeah.
honored. That is what that diaresis means. That is a diacritical mark that means that the vowel sounds are separate. And so the listeners, if they hear that, they now know a little more than they used to. Second thing is that Nausicaa is a character from Homer's Odyssey. And we mentioned this in our last side quest conversation. Basically, what she's a character of is she is a character of the maiden feminine just before or just after she has started menstruating and is about to begin and is embarking on the journey of being a woman and is about to leave the home to become a wife. So in some ways, Nausicaa, when she encounters Odysseus as a figure of the young virginal maiden, is very similar to Persephone and the myth of the rape of Persephone, which scholars like Carl Carini believe was the myth that was told to girls as an initiation ritual into womanhood, which makes sense because it's a rape, right? It's an abduction. It's something that just happens. It's not something that you do, much like the onset of menstruation. Nature chooses, not you. Unlike, say, a male initiation ritual where you're locked in a cave and symbolically buried or drowned and have to encounter fear and potentially humiliation, and then come out in a slightly more active, though also very much passive way. And so we see here in this story, like with so many Miyazaki stories, our protagonist is, of course, a young lady. And something just interesting about that is two things. One is that the very beginning of the movie starts with a tapestry being shown to us with mythological sort of primitivist figures, and we see the history of this world. There were 5 giants, much like the 4 major plagues, like war, famine, disease, and death, that went through and blew up the world essentially 1,000 years ago.
Right.
So like the Tower of Babel sort of myth, and then ever since then, there have been these terrible bugs and this terrible poison throughout the world. And in this tapestry, we see that there will be the coming of a winged divine figure with golden hair and a golden field. And at first, we what's interesting, this sort of sets off Hayao Miyazaki's project in 2 ways. Is it's sort of like the coming of the logos will establish harmony between chaos and order, which is a major theme in this text. How do you deal with the impending chaos, which seems like it's going to certainly destroy us? Well, we should destroy it, but that just results in the chaos fighting back. And the chaos is very strong in this case, as manifested through the great god bugs, the ohms that have sitar played when they show up. It's a funny sound, and so they're very holy. And their names are ohms. The second thing is this sort of sets out the project of Hayao Miyazaki himself, that he must have seen himself in a time of chaos where people did not understand the proper relation between order and chaos, where people were perhaps repressing their inner natures or not appropriately establishing the relationship between the individual and society. And so perhaps he sees himself also as a figure of flight, of the imagination, as an artist, bringing a sort of harmony to the world. And just the third thing to add there is, I think it's funny that, and you were mentioning this earlier, that it's a girl, not a boy. And that's actually something that messes up the interpretation, even though Nausicaa can fly on either a gunship or on her winged board, like a surfboard on the wind. Nobody recognizes her as the potential figure of fate because she's a girl. And so it's almost as if Hayao Miyazaki is sort of saying, with his entire career, often having female protagonists, almost always, except for in his last work, The Wind Rises, it's as if he's saying the answer is right before our eyes, but we do not see it.
Yeah, I think it's really cool how the film does open with that kind of historical background, and it's all through pictures and maybe a little narration, but yeah, you get the sense of the gravity of this story, the epic kind of post apocalyptic feel of it. And the first scenes that you get are of Nausicaa on her glider thingy on these dunes, flying around. It's very like Star Wars, it's like on that kind
Yes.
of scale. It's just fantastic. And I think I'm vaguely suspecting that I saw this movie at some point as a kid or something. Something about it, at least, really like when I watch it, I feel like I have these memories of seeing it before I really knew what it was about. Like maybe we borrowed it from a Blockbuster or something. But there's something like really uh, powerful about those scenes of flying over the sands that just give you this like very strong impression. Again, it's below the level of articulation, right? Like you
Mm.
don't know the whole story of the war and the prophecy and this and that, but you can really feel pretty deeply what a cool thing it would be to zip along and to explore this wasteland, and to have that kind of just freedom, but also skill and confidence. So she's establishes like right away as this awesome character juxtaposed against that epic background. It's just like such a great opening sequence. And the part that I thought was really neat this time watching, I noticed that what she does is find the eye casing of
Mm.
the
The
and it's been shed recently, and so it's fresh, and so she's like so it's she finds it so wonderful. And so as a kid watching this, like maybe you're afraid of this giant thing, but it's harmless, right? It's just the
Yes.
skin. And even more than that, it's wonderful because she can rest under the eye shell, and she literally sees through the eye of the Ohm as
Yes.
this pollen poison stuff falls. But because it can't harm her, she can recognize how beautiful it is. And because it can't harm us, in turn, we're seeing through the eyes
Mm.
of this film. Just like you said, that thing that's right there that you don't normally see. It puts it in perspective. It's like such an interesting way of grappling with the fallout of war, of pollution, of societal or cultural decay, and just like reestablishing, well, how do you solve that? You look through the eyes of the destructive force, and you see the world like for what it is, for this beautiful and wonderful and strange place.
Right.
It's like there's so
Right.
much just in the opening sequence.
Yeah, and so just two things that makes me want to talk about quite a bit is flight in this movie and flight in general in Hayao Miyazaki, and in particular the difference between sort of magical flight and technological flight, which we've seen
Mm.
in the Castle in the Sky, the ability to fly with the sort of Laputa stone, as well as having airships. Here we have like this sort of air glider as opposed to the battleships of Pegite and whatever the other place is called, which I'm forgetting. The Ptolemaians, yes, of course. And what a flight of the imagination might actually be. But also, yeah, I think I have essentially the exact same thought you had about when Nausicaa encounters the Ohm shell. So for one, we see that these creatures like snakes shed, and so they leave vestiges of the past. And the Ohm are, by most people's account in the world in which Nausicaa lives, the great enemies. They are the super they are the tanks or the brigadiers or the big bombers of the bugs. They're completely de-individuated and will work as a giant mass in order to destroy humans, and they've done this multiple times. And in fact, we learned from Lord Yuba, the Gandalf wizard figure of the self, and Hermetic figure, who's the ultimate swordsman, has two swords, the will and the intellect, and has a destiny to seek like Harry Potter for his entire life that's both practical and mythological, that he says his goal is to destroy the poisonous forest. And Obaba, not you, Baba, this time around, says, well, actually, your goal is to fulfill this prophecy. And he says, that's all myths and nonsense. And it's like, well, actually, to live the correct life is to live, or the heroic life is to live a mythological life, even though it's a deeply practical life. But the fact that Nausicaa puts herself underneath this eye case of the Om shows a few things to me. The first thing is that which can destroy you can also protect you. So sort of the idea behind the nascent hero fighting the dragon and then taking a piece of the hide from the dragon to create a shield so that they're then impervious to fire. And so Nausicaa turns something that was once destructive into something protective. And how she makes it protective is, as you said, she utilizes the eye in the same way that the Om would have utilized the eye casing, right? As a protection through which she can see clearly. And the Om's eyes are actually very particularly interesting, right? Because they're very expressive. They're either red for rage or they're blue for being placid. And so one of her abilities seems to be, which is perhaps linked to the ability that she can fly and chooses to face the unknown herself, is that we find out that she actually, through one of her dream sequences, during a golden tentacled Om-induced psilocybin-like fantasy that she has, is that she once raised a small Om. She tried to protect it, but it was taken away from her by these humans, suggesting that kind of the power to her, and perhaps the power of a hero, is the ability to take on the perspective of the enemy and see that the true enemy is not who you project the image of the enemy on, but the evil within yourself, much as we were talking about in Harry Potter in our conversation about 30 minutes ago.
It's almost like it's true. It keeps coming out. The fact that she then rescues Lord Yuba, I find really so. This is another thing I noticed. So once I saw, she's looking through the eye. Okay, that's pretty like right over hitting you over the head with it. But then like very briefly, you notice she hops up and looks out through the eye of the giant like robot thing.
That is the giant.
So she sees from the perspective not only of the so-called enemy, but also from the perspective of the actual, the most, destructive things the humans did, which woke the Om and sort of caused them to rampage. It turns out was that the humans had built or somehow birthed these giant destructive robots, right, that burned down their path. So then the Earth, retaliates with something even more destructive to wipe out.
Very like Final Fantasy VII and the coming of the weapons.
Totally. And so she looks through the eye of the giant robot, and yet is not tainted by that sort of, right. She can overcome that, and she does it through her selflessness. She rescues Lord Yuba by leading the Om away, and she's rewarded with this kind of sprite being, right? The little squirrel guy. Yes. And it's like
fox and squirrel scavengers, right? A squirrel is a scavenger, so it's a fox, and it's also clever. So that's another indication of her talent.
Yeah,
and understanding of her own animal nature.
It's this moment where she allows the fox squirrel, just like the Om, she allows it to be afraid and to bite her, right? And she doesn't flinch from it because she knows that it's more scared than she is, and she knows that the power in her, although perhaps not articulating it this way, is sufficient to embrace and turn to good what appears to be evil. That's
excellent.
And go ahead.
Yeah. No, well, I was just going to say that's excellent, because that's a theme that totally recurs multiple times, because I wanted to compare Nausicaa then to the two other princesses we see. We see Lestelle, whose name seems to be the Star, who dies very, very soon, who was taken hostage on a Talmachian ship, which also the one remaining supergiant, which is now in its nascent form and needs to be redeveloped, is carried on. Well, she dies in front of Nausicaa. Nausicaa then meets the Talmachian princess, who is voiced by Uma Thurman, but could have been Kate Blanchett, who when they find themselves stuck in the poisonous forest outside the known territory, it is fear which directs the Talmachian princess's actions. And we learn that why she's so afraid of these bugs and hates them so much is because they've taken something from her, at least her arm, and possibly more of her, which she tells us Riley, her husband, will understand or will have to deal with. But it's interesting because what Nausicaa sees driving the negative behavior in this animal, which then disappears because of how she treats it, by accepting the fact that it's afraid and showing that she's not something that needs to be feared. Well, she also trains this human in the same way, this princess who was leading a warlike people who had the wrong idea about how to defeat the bugs, because she now feared the bugs because they took something from her which made her both fear and hate them. And so what Nausicaa shows in sort of identifying that fear in this opposing princess, and by embodying sort of a different ideal and different way of looking at things, another perspective, is that she allows this princess who's causing more problems than she's solving, though she self-righteously thinks she's solving them because of her power and her warlike efforts. Well, she starts to have a positive impact on her to the point where eventually this princess from these Tolmekians starts to become more like Nausicaa, because she's been sort of accepted, or because she's been understood as acting out of fear, and Nausicaa shows her that there is another way. She leads the Tolmekian princess in the same way that the savior figure leads everybody in the tapestry.
Yeah, and the Tolmekian princess is like very, golden and very technological and
yes.
So in
very Athena-like.
She's like a distorted version, of the Messiah figure there. And the other princess too is a kind of Messiah, because she sees her, going down with the ship, and she rescues her from the flames and sees that she's too far gone, right? But in some sense she can empathize with her and her suffering in a real deep way. And then she does kind of reappear later in the sense that Nausicaa looks just like her,
embodies her.
When Asbel, the prince of Pejite, comes flying in and is ready to blow up the airship, right? Nausicaa makes the same gesture, and he sees his sister in her, right, the princess.
And there's a second time too, right? When they're chasing down the Ohm that's being carried by the small carrier ship that looks like the ship that carried Hercules over his night sea journey. She's coming in on her glider, and she's sacrificing herself. She has her arms out like she's not going to fight, and the gunner says Lestelle. And so it, interestingly enough, it reminds me of the Animorphs series, where did you read that series at all growing up?
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, just in the very first one, when one of the morphine creatures called an Andalite that fights against the parasitic Yeerks shows up on the Earth, what it does is it, like a star from the sky, falls, having sacrificed itself in a war against a warlike people. It dies, and it gives the gift of its ability to transform to the young people. And so it's almost like what these characters who sacrifice themselves do is they transform the person whose presence they are in, who understands that they have just sacrificed themselves for something greater than them. It's as if what they show is the human ability to sacrifice for the good, or for an aim which is higher than a personal aim, and that there's an aim beyond, like, say, simply fear or force, but that there's actual good that is worth dying for, and that there's like a succession of martyrs throughout both fiction and history that, since we're so highly imitable, seem to be able to pass on this ultimate ideal to each other that can then be embodied by differing humans. But because it's embodied, it can continue to be imitated, which I think is probably the original idea behind like apostolic succession, right? That the spirit is what's supposed to be shared between each generation, not simply blood. Which I think, and not to make the longest point ever, is also tied to the idea that so much of this story takes place in the wind, on the skies,
right.
And that part of Nausicaa as an individual is that she can read the wind very, very well. She's known to be very, very well, and she's very smart too. She can even cultivate the poisonous plants, and with a differing source, she shows that the exact same plants are non-poisonous. So it's almost as if that's a metaphor for humans, right? Because the Pegites and the Tolmekians hate each other because they're at war with each other, and so they're constantly doing something new to destroy the other one, because the other one can't be allowed to survive because they're so destructive. So, like, I think the most ironic instance of that, which we were talking about earlier, was when Pegite destroys its own city in order to eventually destroy the Tolmekians. It's like, you destroyed you accomplished what the Tolmekians wanted to accomplish against yourselves. This
It's
is
the
not a victory.
ad absurdum, yeah, of the whole dilemma there.
Yes,
Yeah.
we must stop them because they're evil. And again, that seems to be not realizing the right idea. It's projecting the evil. It's the opposite of the St. George who has the snake wrapped around his legs that he's chopping at. It's like the snake, evil is in you.
Yeah.
That's what you need to purge. You need
And
to be able to take the perspective of your enemy and see that you're actually the exact same and projecting the exact same thing onto each other, because none of the enemies that these characters identify are actually the real enemy. It's not the giant. It's not each other. It's not the forest. It's the lack of understanding and balance between all of these, which results in the destruction between each of them.
Mhm. The way that Nausicaa, yeah, like the dragon image, right? You make the world from the pieces of it, right? And you use
Yes.
parts of it against other bigger dragons. Yeah, so that's like her secret room that she mentions to Yuba in the beginning,
Yes.
and that's where she has her plants that she collects from the poison forest that are growing beautifully and healthily. And it's funny because it's almost like the viewer sort of forgets that moment because she seems to forget it too. Like we don't see her then, like she promises, actually show Yuba where this secret room is, but instead Yuba finds it because the
Yes.
little Tito guy, the little fox guy, is scrabbling at the door,
Yes.
and Yuba comes looking for Nausicaa, and sees that there's this secret door there, and it's like, oh yeah. So I love that the secret of that process is mirrored in the way that it's represented in the film as this kind of this promise which
Right.
is followed up on but then comes true anyway.
And
It's
just to articulate that, it's like he follows his instincts in order to discover the secret wisdom within himself.
uh, uh,
Um, or so, if we consider the fox squirrel to be a manifestation of instinct, which I think it clearly is,
yeah,
especially in connection with the Tolmekian princess and the fact that they both embody behavior which indicates fear, and that they're acting out of fear. Okay, yeah, excellent, 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 excellent. What was the next thought I wanted to ask you about? There was something very, very, very interesting. I'm sorry, just looking at the right now. Pejite, Obaba's figure. No, I'm sorry. My idea just popped out of my head. What? maybe you should continue the next question or something,
okay,
or continue your thought. I'm sorry.
no sweat, no the thing about the parallel with the other princesses that I was thinking with respect to self-sacrifice on the one hand, is the extreme of Listel, destructiveness on the other. The Tolmekian princess seems to embody that, and somewhere in the middle you have Nausicaa who has the power to destroy and chooses not to use it, but also has this like this intellect, right? Like again, she seems to have some incredible um, experimental prowess, and of course this obvious bravery to do things which are dangerous and perhaps deadly. That she can figure out the way to purify the plants in the poison forest. But then that's not even the end of it because she then discovers later, through this kind of misadventure with the
Yes.
prince, she falls through the false bottom of the forest, the quicksand. It turns out that beneath it there's this other layer of purity and life, just like her secret room, right? But created naturally. And
And it's petrified too.
yeah, it's so old, right? It's the outcome of these processes which seem purely destructive and yet prove to be regenerative. I thought that was fascinating.
That's incredible. Yeah, I do want to pick that up, and I remember the point I wanted to mention earlier, and so maybe we can get to it later. The idea was that each of these royal individuals has lost something or someone or many someone's important to them, and each one of them would have cause to hate and wish to kill the people from the opposing two armies. So it seems as if there were five civilizations, but now Lord Yuba tells us that two have fallen since, and the Pegites and the Tolmekians are not doing very well now. And so, like, say for instance, as Lord Asdel, or like the prince of the Pegites, his sister was captured and then died under Tolmekian control because of bugs, so he could hate all of those. Nausicaa, her father is killed while bedridden by the Tolmekians, and then of course, and I just looked up her name so that I would know it. Princess Kushana, the Tolmekian princess. She hates the bugs and can rightly hate the bugs because they've taken from her, and also can hate the Pegite prince because he destroys 3 of her airships and all of her men on them. So the cycle of hate, I was going to say, could rightly continue on forever in this in this text. But part of the idea, and I haven't fully developed this yet, seems to be sort of the idea from the Odyssey, and also what Peterson often says is that victory over others, like Voldemort seems to think, or Slytherin, is not the ultimate goal, but rather harmony, peace with all that exists. Seems to be to be what these people best would fight for if they want their own lives to be good, their people's lives, and the lives of those other people as well. All right, and so what? Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Well, the harmony idea, it seems like that's clearly something that nature makes happen, but over a span of time and in ways which humans seem unable to keep up with, to understand.
Even though because it takes so long. And so that's interesting. So you were mentioning the fact that the ground layer, which is poison, which is the poison soil, which makes the poison forest, which kills humans, develop, as a result of human pollution. And beneath the poison forest is actually a petrified forest that has pure water running through it, which is the Earth's attempt to purify itself of this poison. And so a question that arises is, well, what is the true poison in this world? Is it the physical poison which is on the ground, or the source of that poison, the cause of it, which is what? The actions of man. Well, where do the actions of man come from? Well, also the choices and intentions and mind and soul of man, right? The poison that physically manifests as a result of the intentions and the goals and the actions of humans. The poison comes from man. And so nature is working to purify that, but not necessarily, as the humans think, to destroy them. Right. It's their inability to understand how nature is going about purifying what they have done that makes them think that nature is antithetical to them and makes them fight back against it, which is for sure going to fail, because those Ohm do not lose when they get angry. And because they're de-individuated, they just do what nature tells them.
Yeah. The sense in which human consciousness is bound to individual people, right, is like the greatest thing and like the most horrible thing. That seems to be the message there, right? Like if we can speak of the earth like intending to do things, or nature trying to do something, then it has to be in a way which is quite different from the sort of consciousness that even Nausicaa has, where she like goes and gathers plants and like runs this experiment and figures this thing out. Like that's operating in a way which is proper to human beings maybe, but so small and limited and time bound compared to the way that the natural world and its processes operate. And the fact that it's a kind of harmonious like end product that you're going for, or maybe not end product, but harmonious process that you're going for, makes it clear that whatever the human consciousness relationship is to this natural world, it's like it's the most difficult piece to fit in there. It's everything else works in a way which seems, as you say, antagonistic, antithetical to the humans, and yet humans are the only ones who can understand what, how the process works and how they can sort of voluntarily then choose to submit themselves to it. And so that's like a huge problem. Right.
And like keeping with the idea of the source. So the source of evil and good seems to be humans, the best and the worst things. What seems to be important for the correct understanding of nature and its relationship to the human is the intention with which the humans approach nature. Because what develops between Nausicaa and the Ohm and nature is trust. and trust that goes deeper than simply language, right? They use their golden truth tentacles to encompass her in order to sort of feel her character or her essence or her intention. The idea seems to be that this goes much deeper than what you say. If she's good, they're going to know. And that's good because they can see her past where she protected Enome and that she wishes to protect and stop killing. She, like them, is a custodian of nature and humans. And so rather than approaching nature with the intent, like Voldemort or the dark side in Star Wars, to dominate, to defeat, she approaches it in a way to say, sort of, my intention is, and not even just to say, but to embody, to be, my intention is to harmonize, is to seek for peace. Yeah.
It seems like her her intention in the beginning at least seems to be like simple curiosity too, though, like to know, to understand, to find cool stuff and give it to the kids of the village to play with and run around the streets with, right? And so it's such a wonderful combination of altruism, right, of like seeking the good of others, but also of just like following her own interests and curiosity, and that's in that way, at least it seems like humans fit very nicely into the larger natural process.
Right. And what she can do, which the Ohm do, is she can self-sacrifice, which she attempts to do multiple times while putting herself in front of the Ohm, and she gets knocked like 50 feet into the air. But also when she sort of like shows herself arms out and unwilling to fight against the two men who were carrying the baby Ohm, which is luring the army of Ohm towards the Valley of the Wind. It's almost as if suggesting that the ultimate power that a human can use is to sacrifice in order to maintain the balance between things. And it is to sacrifice himself in order to maintain harmony, or to sacrifice herself in this case, in order to maintain a harmony, whether between humans and nature or other humans and humans. Because if humans are fighting against humans, then obviously that's also a manifestation of humans versus nature, seeing as we all have our own human natures. And so if you're fighting against humans, that's also an aspect of nature, right? It's the violence of nature manifested in a specifically human way.
Particular thing that I was curious about, though, was like, if that is her memory, I didn't know how to take that, whether it was a kind of dream, like a kind of like symbolic vision that she had of like what the state of things was, or if that was like a concrete memory that she had.
I had the same trouble, but I think it still means the same thing. But I agree that it could be like a symbolic representation or memory, but I'm not sure which.
But so if it is a memory, I find it super interesting that there is some kind of thing that emerges in the Ohm biology, which they can sort of like tap into and access such memories, and those memories can be communicated as images and as experiences, like inner experience can be communicated. I find that to be just remarkable. It's like, the image of the dragon, which has the treasure, which has the gold, right? It's like that.
Yes.
That gold is not. It's not a physical thing. It's the information and the ability to share that story, right?
Yes.
Like bring that back. So I find that super interesting. Where that would then lead, like, is a fascinating thing to try to think about then, because if you can communicate such personal or intimate experiences so lucidly as that, then it seems like you almost don't need articulate speech anymore, and that's like a worrying thing to me, because I put a lot of stock in words. So I don't know. What do you think of that potential problem or question?
Well, let me think about. So we were talking a little earlier, and I was sharing my theory that So let's lay it out. I think you laid it out very nicely. The Ohm have these golden tentacles that they can send out that then connect to Nausicaa, which means that they can communicate in sort of a purely psychological way, or a purely truthful way that requires no intermediary like words. And so it creates a sort of imaginal landscape with golden fields and sort of an imaginary story plays out. And so what I was saying to you earlier is that I think that the Om represents, with this golden capacity to produce images which are true within the mind of Nausicaa, which she must then interpret with the rational mind, is that the Om, like the tree or like the snake in traditional mythology, represents something like the nervous system trying to connect with the rational mind, in which we know from recent work that that is actually how the nervous system communicates with the rational mind, through emotions and images, because of course it can't speak, and is also generally represented by a universal tree, because every human that exists has a nervous system, and therefore that is, every human who exists is very much similar to everyone else. But a big difference between humans is how much they listen to their nervous systems, how much they listen to their dreams or their emotions or their imaginations, and whether they can interpret what that means or not. Because what Nausicaa seems to be able to convey to the Om, which the Om then conveys to her, is the appropriate relationship to them, is the appropriate relationship to her fellow human, which is the appropriate relationship to the world, which is the greatest power a human has is not to harness the power of nature in sort of a Princess Mononoke Irontown way and exploit it, or to take the mana out of it like Shinra in Final Fantasy VII, but to live in balance with it, as if there is nothing better in the world than establishing peace and harmony. Because in your pursuit of power, you will produce the conditions necessary to use that power in a violent way. And because the only reason that you produce power in the first, or excuse me, if you produce power in a way that disrupts the harmony of nature, then the power will end up doing, the power will not do the good it is intended to do. If the reason for getting the power is in order to make things better, it will inevitably make things worse. So just to wrap back around, it made me think that what these Oms are trying to convey to the humans, and which this specific Om conveys to Nausicaa, and several of them in the final time she's touched by the golden tentacle, she's touched multiple times, is they are sort of speaking the mythological language of the ultimate goal that a human has to figure out in a particular way within their own life how to manifest. And so just as Lord Yuba has a connection between his mythological role and his actual practical application of that role, and he says that is just a myth, so does Nausicaa, like every human, have to figure out how she fits within the mythological story in order to act in the practically best way in the world. Once she understands in a fuller, richer way that harmony between humans and nature is the only way to keep the humans from being destroyed by nature, then she can actually help to prevent that from happening. Whereas everybody else around her who fails to realize this, who are not the saviors, because they don't have this realization or this consciousness, because they haven't listened to nature or studied it in the same way that she has, both external to herself and internal, it gives her the ability to embody an ideal in a specific way that then is mimicked by everybody in her presence, all three differing armies, and even the Om itself. Right. It's as if self-realization of your own nature is the most powerful thing you can possibly do, even more powerful than having a super giant with a laser beam mouth. Right. Because the giant doesn't get rid of the Om, it destroys some of them, but Nausicaa is the one who gets them all to go away without destroying them.
Yes, it's fascinating, the kind of self understanding that takes place there. Hearing you explain it in that way, I think is helpful, because even if there aren't words, even if there isn't speech, there's still a kind of interpretation that's going on there. In her communicating that memory, she's in a sense like reliving it, bringing it to consciousness. That seems right, and then having to act on it and embody something new, or embody something in a new way, at least. That all seems spot on. And the fact that that the singing that happens in that scene, like there's this music that
la 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 la. It's all the same word too, right? It's la la
it's
la.
wordless and yet not wordless. Yeah, it's kind of on that that liminal place between articulation
Yes.
and that which passes the ability to express. It's also, to me, something like the boundary point or the threshold between um, her scientific, intellect
Mm.
and her more sort of poetic memory and imagination, which I think maps loosely onto like stages of life development, right? Like children more
Yeah.
imaginative, and adolescents and grown-ups more kind of analytic and scientific, but have to sort of remain connected to that that layer, that sub layer of myth, of poetry.
Well, and that's so important. That's so important. Let me just jump in here because that's the keeping alive of the bell from the Polar Express, or the becoming childlike again for Paul, because this seems to be the antidote to what to do if your people who have taught you and taught you their specific tradition are wrong-minded,
Uh,
or have the wrong sense of their relationship, or their relationships to themselves, to their own history, to the other people who exist, and to nature. Because if she is purely indoctrinated by her people, if she does not develop the logos or her relationship to her own inner nature, how is she going to help the people keep from destroying themselves?
yeah.
She can't. And remember the image. If we just think about the original memory or dreamscape that she shares with the Ohm, it's her trying to protect an Ohm underneath a tree, of course, symbol of the nervous system. And then what is it that's the most striking image in that entire scene? It's the hands, like from Labyrinth. All these grabbing hands trying to grab the Ohm. And so I think that's so great, because if you look at pictures of a motor homunculus or sensory homunculus, how humans, according to um, uh, according to what we use mental resources to represent and use in our bodies, our faces and our hands are obviously the biggest because we use them for everything, predominantly communication. But what is a representation of a bunch of hands without eyes? The opposite of like an Ohm's shell with so many eyes. Well, it's doing without understanding, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the vast majority of people who don't understand what they're doing is wrong. And what is Nausicaa left with at the end of that dream? Her feeling. Her feeling is real.
Yes.
She knows that what happened was not right.
Yeah.
It was wrong. And it hurt her. And she cried. And so what is she left with? And what does she convey to the Ohm and thus to her own nature? That she has the correct sense of fairness. That she has the right sense of morality, and that was not learned from other people. That in fact all the people around her are wrong, or do not understand what they do. They know not what they do, as it were. And so where does she find this sense of rightness? Well, not in society, not in anybody else, but where? In herself.
Yeah.
And it's as if she can convey that to the Ohm, because the Ohm are potentially a representation of that which is within her anyway, insofar as external nature reflects internal nature, which obviously it does, because those are just abstractions of nature. Um, but that it's almost like saying that in a human, because, and this is something we actually know now because of the work of Jacques Painsepp, we actually have fairness circuits just like rats do. Your sense of fairness does not come from philosophy or from your society and how they act, but from your biology. It's so deeply rooted into you that the only place you can find out what is fair is by looking within to your own emotions and how you feel as well. Obviously, this you can be wrong about things, and you can misinterpret things, and that's very difficult. And the path to wisdom is the path of the fool, as it were. You have to make many errors in order to become wise. But it seems to be showing that to be the savior of a people, you cannot simply take on all the opinions and actions of the people and assume that's right, but you have to see whether that accords with your own nature, with your own feeling.
Right.
Does this feel right?
Right.
I mean, even the figure that transcends this is the figure of authority, the king and her father, ultimate authority, in a way.
And she even
Yeah.
stands up to, I think it's interesting how she stands up to Obaba after the king's killed, and Obaba's like trying to stir up the people to revolt, and they'll all be sort of massacred, but like her to be the right thing to do because the trees are dying anyway, this and that. But Nausicaa stands up to her too, and I think that seems right. That in some sense, Obaba's got like a lot of the good things of the tradition. She's got the stories, and she knows about the prophecy and about what Lord Yuba's up to. but she doesn't have the whole picture either, right? She's sort of trapped
Mm.
within her old understanding
Role.
as well. And
Yes.
that kind of prejudice which says, okay, that figure must be male. That's the same sort of prejudice as
Hmm.
this, okay, our king is dead, we must all now die, bravely and valiantly.
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
Right, right, because that does seem like a clear thing to do. That once the king has died, so do the people die. But that doesn't reflect the second half of the mythology. And as we know from the Egyptian mythology, what happens when Osiris dies? Well, the son of Osiris, which in this case would be the daughter, goes down to the underworld to restore him by taking on his vestments, by becoming a leader who is no longer blind, not just hands, but a leader who can see, who might be represented as having a golden crown or a golden halo indicating golden perspective. And in this case, will actually be on a golden field, which is often the figure of the Elysian fields or of heaven or of the person who is bringing the ideal future to replace the unbearable present.
yeah.
And so you're totally right. And just to connect that back to Hayao Miyazaki's idea is that perhaps part of what he's doing artistically through manifesting his own nervous system, the collective unconscious, is showing the gifts that the logos of women in this generation will contribute to the culture at large,
Right.
in the entire world, because he's of course Japanese, though we're Westerners, so this is a worldwide influence.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
totally. To take off
that
that
yeah,
blinder, to take off that old traditional sort of mandate that says, okay, only males can be heroes. Once you remove that, then you sort of open up this huge untapped resource of
and
potential in your
yeah,
society and your culture.
and how she does this is she does do a couple things that are sort of prototypically male in terms of like flying and being an active hero, but she also cultivates her relationship to nature, which I think is the most important aspect
Yeah.
here, almost indicating that the path of, like, say, the feminine hero might involve some degree of self-discovery of her relationship to her own nature as well. That almost almost as if the path of the hero for both male and female is to discover their inner nature and therefore their part in the world in which they play, but that those paths, though symbolically equivalent, might be practically different, might manifest themselves in a different way. In fact, you might find that what exists, that there is something distinct within women from men, though of course they're mostly the same, because of course we're all the same species, that there's something nourishing or cultivating or harmonizing in the abilities of the feminine nature, that perhaps that's even part of. I do think the harmony bit is correct. Just if you think of the idea of Kali as both the giver of life and destroyer from the Hindu religion, that which is feminine is that which gives life but also takes it away. It's not only the mother but also the plague or the devouring bear or Om in this case. But that it's almost as if what Hayao is saying is that in this time of great change, when women are now getting access to the logos or to professions in which they would have never had an opportunity to, in a time when they have the ability to contribute to culture in a way that they've never been able to, the most appropriate thing for them to do in order to produce the best possible thing or harmony would be to first understand their own individual or their own feminine natures or their own natures.
Yeah.
Rather than simply attempting to mimic the nature of someone who has been traditionally successful, like say a male lifestyle or male dress or male practices, that perhaps there's something much deeper that's far more their own, that's potentially world saving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Like the instinct that she has to save the baby Om in that memory of hers, right? That's this thing that can't really be accounted for by any outside influence, really, except
Right.
for her own sort of inborn sense of the value of life or of fair play or whatever. Uh, and that's something that, yeah, does strike me as sort of particularly feminine in some senses, like to protect and try to save this little creature. As a kid, like I would kill little worms and caterpillars and stuff like that. That's
Yes.
what I did.
Yes. So would I. So
And
would I.
that's
I would pull the claws off of little crabs.
yeah.
I was terrible.
So
I still feel bad
so
about it.
yeah,
But yeah,
we're not quite made of the right stuff to deal with a situation where there's this kind of tipping point from destructive patterns of behavior to more like salvific or whatever you want to call it, whatever it is that she seems to embody. It's in her, and it's deeply in there, and can be sort of triggered and let out by these kind of experiences, but can't be fully accounted for by something outside of herself. That's
and just to make it, I'm going to make this as broad as possible, and we'll see if it makes any sense. So I've recently been reading a book that I know you've read and written a blog post on, and perhaps we'll have a conversation about it soon. The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion by Jonathan Haidt.
oh yeah.
And so something very interesting about males, especially during adolescence, is they start to produce more testosterone than females. It's also around the time of adolescence that women, because of their sexual vulnerability, become more anxious for the rest of their lives, as because of course they're more sexually vulnerable for the rest of their lives until menopause, and also where men and women's levels of aggression change. In the population, 60% of men are more disagreeable or aggressive than women are, and so that's almost even. But at the ends of that bell curve would be where all the action happens. And so those who are more disagreeable, I would say, produce more testosterone than those who are agreeable, which means that they're more likely to fight. And often they end up, more people end up in prison who are disagreeable. The most disagreeable people do. I suggest that that might be sort of how you might view part of history: testosterone, logos fighting against each other. But what this sort of shows is that, well, where I see the biological or the neurobiological sort of root of agreeableness is in the production of a neurotransmitter called oxytocin, which is called the hugging or the kissing hormone. It makes you feel feelings of affection, and it makes you want to encourage young people and protect them and nurture them. It's actually produced due to physical contact, and new fathers produce it as they start to produce less testosterone. And its original evolutionary function seems to have been to prepare a woman and her nervous system to take care of a small child. So you have to become much less aggressive. And so why I'm giving you this neurobiology is that I think part of what the nervous system in Hayao Miyazaki and in this movie is trying to indicate is that perhaps we're not supposed to replace men or destroy those who harness more testosterone, but to produce more oxytocin or more agreeableness, just because how Jonathan Haidt describes the function of oxytocin now is not simply to make you more docile, but to produce more trust between members of a group. And if you have more trust between members of a group, and this is something in every epic, which is now borne out by rigorous science, you have a more cohesive group. The more cohesive the group is, the better it fares in intergroup conflict. Mm-hmm. And so part of what I think the secret in here is that to feminize the world a little bit, or to accept the place of oxytocin, would create greater trust and therefore strength between us as a people, even more than simply pursuing pure strength in the form of competition promoted by testosterone would. That if we take a more balanced view of that which is actually feminine and that which is actually masculine, we can potentially produce or become cognizant enough to use both of those aspects of nature and neurotransmitters in order to produce a more harmonious and therefore more effective and stable group.
Yeah, I think that's interesting as a kind of upshot of the mythological portrayal of the stuff to then go and find scientific evidence or sort of like other biological manifestations of essentially the same thing, right? That's
Yes.
fascinating, and that's again like something that's kind of new under the sun here, like to have the technology and the methods available to actually test this kind of stuff and put put an interpretive, conceptual, scientific framework around it rather than only a kind of story, a narrative.
Well, it makes sense because even though science is a more articulated version of myth, we still use the same structure of consciousness to represent it, right? So it's almost as if the figures, or even though that which is within science is so highly technical compared to what is the relatively primitive language, though deeply, infinitely meaningful language of epic or myth, um, since we bring the same mental apparatus to bear on the interpretation of it, it would make sense that our myths, which seek to explain ourselves and our relation within the world, would have a profound connection to science as well, which has also been produced from us in order to teach us about the world. Though, of course, Peterson says myths teach us how to act in the world. Science teaches us what's in the world, but we are actors within the world using science in order to do what? Um, in order to affect how we behave in the world, or to change the world in some respects. So it just makes sense to me that as these are two endeavors of human consciousness, that there would be consilience between them, as E.O. Wilson says, that it shouldn't surprise us to find connections, that it might be surprising to us because we haven't seen them before, but that it should also be no surprise because, of course, since these are manifestations of human wisdom, they're probably differing ways of looking, or different levels of analysis of potentially similar phenomena.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that a lot. I think the kind of pursuit then that you see of Lord Yuba, right, the master swordsman, the sort of father figure, or like you said, mercurial figure. So that sort of pursuit, and then Nausicaa's, which actually ends up embodying the myth that he apparently is sort of searching for all along. Those two things in the film, those two characters are so tightly knit together, right? Like they
Yes.
deep understanding, and I think that's a beautiful sort of like image, in a sense of what you're talking about. The two approaches are both, they're both after the same thing ultimately, and they both work hand in hand. Like he rescues her in her moment of greatest crisis, just as she does for him in that early moment in the film.
That's so good. And just to support exactly what you're saying, in the Odyssey, the two figures that help Odysseus, the two figures of his consciousness that help him so much, or the two figures of the dominance of the unconscious, are Hermes, the trickster, Hermetic figure of a divine inspiration, and also Athena, wisdom, a male and a female figure. And here's something even better. Scholars suggest that originally the god that would have helped Odysseus would have been a trickster sort of god that fools people, that then developed later into a wisdom sort of god like Athena. And that in fact Odysseus was probably a figure originally of the trickster, who later became a figure of the hero, because the figure of the hero transitioned from a physical testosterone-based figure like Ajax or Achilles or Hercules, to a more, not a wiser, but a more cunning, a more many-sided, a more logos-using sort of character. And so the relationship between Lord Yuba as sort of a Hermetic figure and Nausicaa as sort of an Athena-like figure, and the fact that he's older than she is and she's younger, she's the newer generation, also shows that sort of transformation of the trickster figure into the figure of wisdom, because the trickster is a step along the way, or a step along the path of the development of wisdom. And if Nausicaa is a figure of wisdom, then she is not simply the character who is existing within that world at that time, but is rather the embodiment of the ultimate quality of humans, which is wisdom, or the capacity to bring harmony to yourself, your people, and to your people and nature.
Yeah, right. So she like flies around, whereas he just rides chocobos on the sand.
Yeah, and I thought it was so interesting that he had two chocobos. I set that to myself as a riddle in the beginning, and I wanted to maybe test you on that, but I don't also want to put you on the spot like that, because I had some time to think about it. But the fact that he carries two around at first and he's on one immediately suggested to me that either A, somebody had been with him who died, or B, he was seeking to save somebody or carry something back with him. That one was supposed to be a carrier.
Well, isn't it at the end?
Of
At the end in the end credit, isn't he running along with the prince, with Prince Asbel on the chocobo?
and and see that's even better, because Hermes is known to be a psychopomp, one who takes people between realms, the living and the dead. And so what does this guy do? What does Lord Yuba do? Well, he goes between the poison forest and or chaos and the known world or known territory of culture. And so why does he have a second chocobo? Because he takes people from the known to the unknown to turn the unknown into known for them. Yeah. And so who does he take in here next? He takes the Pegite prince in order to initiate him now into the mysteries of the unknown. And which I think is incredible. But also what's incredible about that is that his initiation is limited, that the ultimate initiation does not come from one person guiding you or even a God guiding you, but you guiding yourself. Because Nausicaa has to understand the meaning of the memory or the dream that the ohm induce to her. She has to see something in herself. She has to be led to it herself. And so that seems to still indicate to me that the Pegite prince, he's got, like his people who destroyed themselves, have a way to go. It's almost as if the Valley of the Wind is not a real place, but more like an ideal place that the Pegites and the Tolmekians are fighting in order to develop, in which, in fighting each other, they almost destroy the ideal paradise because they almost destroy themselves, and therefore there would be nobody to embody it. But in coming to peace and seeing Nausicaa, seeing this divine feminine figure, they can start to restore their idea of what a heaven-like place, a valley of the wind, would be. And I think that's actually evidenced by the fact that when the ultimate battle is about to happen, what happens? The wind stops. It's like the thinking is gone. Right. The logos has disappeared. And it's like heaven is going to disappear with the disappearance of humans when they destroy themselves. With nobody to embody ideals, the ideals will become like those trees beneath the poison forest. Petrified.
Right. And covered over and lost to consciousness, or to the possibility of being discovered.
Right.
It's
right, without a discoverer.
It's a really optimistic movie. Like the way that it ends is on such an uplifting and sort of miraculous note, actually. That I find it interesting that to think about this as the starting point of Miyazaki's kind of career at like prior to the formation of the studio around it. Because I think you can see an awful lot of the different motifs that he comes back to time and again are there in the film. And I'm wondering now about the kind of trajectory, and maybe we can sort of talk about this next time if it is the last one. Like how does the attitude towards this kind of these similar problems that keep coming back, and these sort of similar solutions to them that come back time and again, does that same optimism recur as he goes through his career? Does he become more jaded? Does he shift his thinking on any key points, or is it pretty consistent way along? I would be interested in trying to get some kind of handle.
Well, that's an excellent question.
Cool.
I especially because in the next work we're going to watch, of course, the word wind reoccurs,
right.
And in fact, a big part of it will be sort of as a self-reflective that even with the greatest ideals, the world corrupts you to some degree, or you become corrupted to some degree, and then have to come back out from that. And I think that might be part of the theme, and maybe we'll be able to see that. But something just to connect to that, to maybe set the groundwork, the foundation, the source for next time, is that at the very end of this story, a non-poisonous tree appears. And so that's almost indicating the coming of a non-poisonous artist into the world, right?
Totally.
That this world is full of miasma and chaos and terror, and there are ample causes for violence and revenge, and that many things are terrible. But that amidst all of that, one small non-poisonous thing, like one small thought or one small person, one small act or one small artist might have a salubrious or salutary effect on the world around it. And so if at the end of this first work, Hayao Miyazaki has become a great artist or an artist at some level and wishes to have a purifying effect on the world or a harmonizing effect on the world, that would be something I would definitely look for in the next movie we're going to watch, his final movie. Does he, in the narrative of the movie, if the protagonist is him, who will actually create airplanes, warplanes, which will be very interesting, does he manage to have a salubrious or salutary effect? Does he remain an uncontaminated tree? Or does the contamination of the world, of the soil, catch him?
Cool.
And so if an artist's work is self-reflective in that way, perhaps we'll see whether he keeps that pure intention and manages to go through his career in that way. That'd be really interesting to see.
Right on.
Yeah. Well, Wes, and I think I undersold you today. Did you also put out a Bookworm Games? Did you also record that today?
I started to record that, and I realized that I have to add some stuff to it. But yeah, more or less, got that recorded today. Although I wrote it mostly yesterday.
Well, that's super impressive. So you've taught a class on The Hobbit, you've done a Bookworm Games on Earthbound, you've done a conversation on Harry Potter, and now you've done a conversation on Nausicaa. What a magical day!
It's a good day. Yeah, not too bad.
Well, now, what are you doing with the rest of it? Adding more to that podcast?
Yeah, I gotta try to finish that up. I gotta prepare a little bit for tomorrow's Hobbit camp, and maybe this story that I've been working on off and on, because this is NaNoWriMo. They do a July thing, and so someone at Signum wanted to do that, so I was like, yeah, I'll try to do that, but I really fallen off the wagon on that since Hobbit camp started, so maybe I'll try to write a little more of that story.
What is NaNoWriMo? Is that a National Writing something month?
Theoretically you write a novel in a month. National.
Oh, okay.
I've never actually really accomplished it, but it's a good way to kind of get motivated to work on writing, and creative writing is a really hard thing to do for me. So I need a lot of kind of impetus to get going on it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we all do. And I was actually thinking recently that would be an interesting thing for us to do, either via writing or podcasting, where we just give ourselves either a topic or a challenge or a situation, which we then have to write a story about. So like it could be like Red, or it could be somebody being pushed to his limit or something like that. Something very simple, where because we have that problem and that theme, we can then manifest a story around it. Start with the end and see what we produce.
Sure, yeah. There's tons of great like workshop materials and stuff, and it would be cool to try to add to that. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, Mr. Wes Schantz, I would say enjoy your rest, but enjoy your continued work today.
You too.
And apparently we could all work a lot harder, and you're showing us. Maybe I've got more to do today now too.
You've got Oscar back on tomorrow, right?
That's true. Nice. Yes, I've got the Great Men podcast happening again tomorrow. We're talking about Cyrus, and funny enough, I already asked Oscar whether we can talk about connections between Harry Potter and Cyrus, because they both have endangered births, okay, you might say. And yeah, so they're similar figures in some ways, different in others.
All right. Well, thanks again.
And thank you. Until next time.
All right.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.